Hi, my name is Maria, and you're listening to the podcast where we deconstruct someone's PhD experience so that you can reconstruct your own. This is a journey with many challenges, but you might find yourself in a similar situation as one of the guests here. Enjoy listening. When was the last time that you got a product or a service that delivered a different thing compared to the proposal? Scientific proposals can be seen in the same way. You might wonder, how is this the case? The proposal is actually a suggestion on how to solve a specific problem. And when you, as a researcher, are hired on a proposed project, you are the problem solver element in this equation. So now what's on the other side of this equation? It is the project execution. The execution is your special flavor of how you get to deliver the proposed solution. When researchers are writing, let's call this a pre-award phase. So let's divide it in a pre-award phase. The project gets awarded. There's a post-award phase. You are hired. You start working on it. And basically, this is the moment when you come in and all you know is that there is this project proposal, there's a grant agreement, there's a consortium agreement. You start reading that without maybe much history on how it happened, what was the origin, what is the funding body, where does the money come from? Because nowadays, money for research comes from, if we're talking about, for example, Europe, the money comes from the government or European Commission. How does this originate? When the European Commission announces a call, they are in contact with a lot of researchers, but this is not a one-on-one connection. So imagine somebody in Brussels sitting in the European Commission who is in charge of education and research and science. And this person wants to give money to something that is going to be successful in the future. So of course, this person is also doing a job. So they want to guess the best they can what is going to be a winning scientific breakthrough. So that being said, it is important to take this project proposal and hold it lightly. If you are thinking people who wrote this, they had a perfect idea, they worked it out to the last detail, they know exactly what's supposed to be done, you are probably wrong. So you coming on this project in the stage when it's awarded, the idea is that you are going to work it out and you are going to figure out what exactly the topic is going to be. There is a general theme, there is a general topic, but like the specific tiny detail and tiny fraction of science where you're going to push this boundary is up to you to be determined. You also get to decide which detail you are going to choose. And it's not going to be like you will decide, okay, I'm going to go there, and then it turns out it's a dead end. So holding it lightly, you will find it easier to say, okay, I tried it, this doesn't work, it's a dead end, let me try another route. So having said all of this, it's also important you come for the first time, you see this project proposal, you read it, and if you're interested, then go and discuss with your professor. What was the origin of it? How was this made? If there are more partners, how did these partners come together? What was the idea behind this collaboration? If it's between a university and a company, what is the interest of the university? What is the interest of a company? Or two universities, what is the interest of each group? And how can you then position yourself in that playfield? Do not think that professors have it all figured out. That's why you are there, to also navigate a bit in which direction it's possible to go, in which direction you would like to go, in which direction it makes sense to go. And then what happens is, for science, usually you get money upfront at university, usually. So you get your money, let's say European Commission gives you money, or the government, or a company, and then you have to report. Let's say after a year, they want to see whether what was promised in the original project proposal is actually delivered. And it might not be the case at all, which is totally fine. Because in science, you also need to leave room for a bit of magic, for a bit of mystery. Because if everything is already figured out, then you are doing a very incremental work, which is also totally fine. And maybe you are not able to get to the 10%, you are able to get to the 2%. But on the way of figuring out what is happening, what makes it 2% and not 10% or 0.2%, you're also going to figure out, these are the details that we need to focus on. And these are actually the critical points and stumbling points that we need to work out a bit more to figure it out. So when you're having these meetings with the funding body, what they want to see is that actually you are doing something. It's not the idea that they scrutinize you and you have to prepare more than you are actually doing your research. There are also people on the other side who have their job and who also need to report it, where the money went. It makes total sense. So don't be afraid to show them that also maybe there was a deviation, maybe there was a delay. There are so many things that are outside of our control. If you are working in the lab, you know that sometimes the tools, they break down. Sometimes there are factors that are outside of our control that are going to influence how fast our research is going to go. I do know quite a lot of people who have struggled because they did everything they could that was up to them. And then maybe their partners didn't provide their services at the right time or at the time that was indicated. And of course, why this happened, it's also because they had trouble on their side. So my advice is take things lightly. And when you are starting, don't be afraid to ask your professor, okay, what was the initial idea when this was written? Who wrote it? Because in the case of my project, there were people who wrote it. Some of those people retired. They handed over to others. Some of those people went to work on another subject. So by the time the project was granted and the funding body, in this case, European Commission, they said, okay, you can go, we give you the money, you can start the project. Between that moment and hiring the first person on the project, which was myself, there was 10 months difference. 10 months. And also on the European Commission side, it counts as project has started 10 months ago. Doesn't matter that nobody was hired and nobody was working on it. So in that case, I did not do this thing to hold it lightly and discuss and figure out who wrote, what they wrote, why they wrote it. It was also a collaboration between two countries. So what was the idea? And it took me a year, if not a year and a half, to bump into all sorts of problems and confidentiality issues and trust issues before sitting down all together and figuring out, okay, what are we going to do now? Because it was a totally different consortium of people than the consortium that initially wrote it. In that sense, we needed to see, does it still make sense to do this? Because the project was written a number of years ago. Is this still valid today? Imagine this scenario. Imagine it's a bingo. First, you need to buy a lottery ticket. Then you need to think of numbers. You need to fill out your lottery ticket. Then you need to submit it. And then you have to wait for the time that the lottery numbers are being taken out. Then you figure out whether your ticket was granted, whether you got the numbers right or not. When you get the numbers right, you get the money, and then you start thinking, oh, how am I going to spend this money? Maybe you had initial idea like, I'm going to buy a new house or whatever your dreams are. I'm going to travel the world, whatever it is. But then when you actually have money on your bill, then you start thinking, is this really how I want to do it? Is this still applicable? Are my dreams still the same now as they were before? Research projects are the same. It's a bit like playing bingo. So what the researchers do, they wait for the calls opening from the European Commission or from the government. And then once the calls are open with specific topics, they write the project proposal. Then they submit it. Then they have to wait for a few months to get a review. Then once the review is good or bad, sometimes you also have a second round. So once you have gone through all these rounds and let's say your project is granted, it's been usually at least a year. And nowadays in science, things move very fast. A year has passed. Then money is there, they can hire somebody. Then it takes maybe on average 6 months to hire somebody. So imagine there's a 1.5 years that passed since the original idea and the moment you're starting your PhD. So you are starting your PhD based on this old idea. Does it make sense to continue like that? Ask your professor, sit down and figure out, okay, does it still make sense? Is it still valid? What are current problems? What are problems nowadays? That's why usually professors ask you to do a state of the art in the beginning, because then you figure out, okay, is it still applicable or not? Are we still going that way? Oh no, look, somebody already demonstrated this, or somebody has demonstrated a part of it. So how can we build up on their work? How can we learn something from there? There are many ways, but it starts with this initial conversation. This is really important to see where you are, the moment you are starting, the people you are starting with, the consortium you are starting with. How are you going to position yourself there? Because if you already have an idea that you want to explore something that is going to bring you closer to the academic path, then discuss with your professor how can you shape your PhD so that it brings you closer to becoming assistant professor. If you want to go to the industry, then discuss with your professor how can you shape it so that it brings you closer to, I don't know, maybe doing more project management or collaborating more, communicating more with partners, seeing what kind of business can be developed, what kind of patents you can make, whatever comes to mind. If you want to specialize in another area, if you want to stay and work at university as a research support staff, see what is interesting for you in there that you can learn during this project. And, by the end of your PhD, doesn't mean that you still have the same idea, but you are going somewhere. You are making one step at a time. Maybe after 1 or 2 years, you figure out, oh my God, this is totally not how I imagined. Maybe you imagine this is going to be amazing and working with these people and companies and universities and collaboration and all is like very bombastic. And you figure out there's no collaboration at all. Nobody is transparent. People are not collaborative. If that's the case and you don't see yourself wasting time, if your circumstances cannot change, what else can you change? Maybe there is enjoyment in something else in the same thing. Maybe there is no enjoyment anymore and you decide to just do something else. All of that being said, the possibilities are going to open once you start talking with your professor, taking this grant agreement. Doesn't matter which stage you are in. If you are hearing this just now and you have been 2 years down your project and you figure out now this is important, it's okay. Sit down with your professor and say, hey, I just found out about this. Might be too late. Might not be relevant anymore. Can we discuss this? Is this totally irrelevant now, or is there something else to it? This means also taking the steering wheel of your PhD in your hands. So learning to drive and learning to navigate throughout your PhD. Good luck. Thanks for listening to this podcast episode. If there was anything that you discovered or found remotely interesting, do share. I'm always curious to hear what is it that you resonated with. See you in the next episode.